The Selfish Gene, Chapter 6, Genemanship, by Richard Dawkins. In this chapter, Dawkins examines the goals of selfish genes and how it helps replicas of itself in other survival machines, which appears as altruistic behavior. Specifically, he discusses the concepts of kin selection, kin discrimination, limited proximity, and Hamilton's rule. Firstly, Dawkins considers the albino trait, which is recessive and appears in 1 out of 20,000 people in the population. In the heterozygous form, it is carried by 1 in 70. Hypothetically, albino genes could have a greater fitness if it assisted its own survival in the gene pool by programming its bodies to behave altruistically towards other albino bodies. But why doesn't this happen? Albino genes do not have a conscious motive to survive. But if albino genes could confer two independent effects, a very pale complexion and selective altruism towards other individuals with very pale complexions, then it could become more numerous in the gene pool. However, this is very unlikely. And this is the same with a gene that was pre-programmed to save someone from drowning. Can genes recognize copies of itself in other individuals? Obviously, close relatives have a high chance of sharing genes and is clearly demonstrated by the altruism of parents towards their young. An individual that dies in order to save 10 close related individuals who also have copies of their kin altruism gene allows more copies of the same gene to survive. In terms of a measure of relatedness, parents and children have exactly 50%, and siblings, brothers and sisters, have on average 50% chance of inheriting the same genes. By drawing a family tree, the relatedness between two related people can be worked out by the distance up to the common ancestor and down, called the generation distance. For example, if A is B's uncle, then the generation distance would be 1 plus 2, which equals 3. We can multiply each generation distance by half, which, as we said, is the degree of relatedness between parent and child. The proportion of relatedness due to ancestors is half to the power of g, which is the generation distance. For example, first cousins have 2 common ancestors, with the generation distance being 4 each. We then need to times by 2. Second cousins will have a relatedness of 1 over 32. Third cousins 1 over 128. Parents and children are half, and twins are 1. Uncles and aunts, nephews, nieces, grandparents, grandchildren, and half-brothers and sisters have relatedness of a quarter. Hence, the altruistic genes have a minimum requirement to be successful and on average live on in bodies of enough individuals saved by the altruist to compensate for the death of the altruist itself. Genes that save 5 cousins may not become numerous, but genes that save 2 siblings or children or parents, 4 half-siblings, or uncles, aunts, nephews, nieces, grandparents, and grandchildren, or 8 first cousins, etc. would. Dawkins takes time here to criticize the term kin selection, often used to describe such arrangements, because it treats family as a special case of group selection. Hamilton's argument is that family and non-family is a matter of mathematical probability, and animals do not behave altruistically towards all family members, and selfishly towards everyone else. Parental care and sibling altruism evolve because of the chance that altruistic genes are present in the body of the beneficiary. However, decisions that you will act altruistically depend on the risk of death for yourself and the potential beneficiary. If the risk to save someone is very small, then saving a third cousin's life may be worth it. Also, saving an old relative who is going to die soon has less impact on the gene pool. There is a usually higher selective advantage for grandparents to grandchildren altruism than the other way around, unless there is a high infant mortality rate. Dawkins likens individuals to life insurance underwriters. The net risk to the altruist must be less than the net benefit to the recipient multiplied by their relatedness, which is called Hamilton's rule. Our pre-programmed behaviors appear like it made a complicated calculation. Dawkins says that this is like throwing a ball high in the air and catching it again, which appears as if the catcher has solved a set of differential equations to predict the ball's trajectory. Dawkins provides a simple example of this in action. He asks us to imagine an animal who has found a clump of 8 mushrooms. It needs to factor in nutritional value and the risk they might be poisonous. It can only eat 3 of them, so it decides to call brother B, which has half relatedness, cousin C, which has 1/8 relatedness, and D, which has no relation to him. The net score of keeping quiet is 6 for each mushroom, which is a total of 18. If he eats just 2 mushrooms, which gives a total of 12 points, and the benefit of brothers and cousins to eat the 2 remaining mushrooms, which is half times 12 and 1/8 times 12, then he gets a total point of 19.5. Altruism would therefore pay. Genes that have survived are based on estimates of cost and benefit of past experiences and environments of the species. If conditions do not deviate too dramatically, survival machines tend to make the right decisions. Genes will be penalized if their survival machines make erroneous judgments because of rapidly changing conditions. Therefore, Dawkins reminds us that estimates of relatedness can be subject to error and uncertainty, as survival machines need to know who is related to them. How would animals recognize their close relatives? It depends on the species. Dawkins points out that species that move in small groups, for example whales, dolphins, or monkeys, or do not move around much, operate on the general rule of treating everyone nicely. For example, whales and dolphins will help baby whales and dolphins and injured individuals to the surface to breathe if they cannot swim. The high probability that a random member is a relative makes the altruistic behavior worth the cost, and it becomes more frequent. Another example is adult baboons sacrificing their lives against predators such as leopards to save the rest of the troops. Chicks usually Twitter call their other chicks to share food because strangers are not normally found in nests. However, mistakes in following rules frequently apply. Wild dolphins save drowning humans, or orphaned monkeys can be adopted by a female who lost her child. Paradoxically, monkey mothers that have lost their children steal babies from another female and look after it, freeing the female rival from the burden of child rearing and allows the rival to have another child. Species can also take advantage of other species' misfirings. Cuckoos, called brood parasites, lay eggs in the nests of other birds that cannot recognize their own eggs. For example, in herring gulls, egg recognition is not important because, in nature, gull eggs do not roll to other nests. On the other hand, gulls can recognize their own chicks because chicks wander to other nests. In contrast, guillemots recognize their own eggs because they nest on flat rocks where there is a danger of eggs rolling around and getting mixed up. Therefore, an altruistic friendly egg-sitting behavior will not develop like in gulls, because guillemots' average clutch size is 1 egg, and this strategy would easily be invaded by a cheetah who refused to sit on an egg and spent time laying more eggs. Hence, the evolutionarily stable strategy for guillemot is recognizing its own eggs and sitting exclusively on it. Songbirds, with the risk of being cheated by cuckoos, develop markings to recognize their own species. However, as an example of mimicry, cuckoos have retaliated by lying and making their eggs more similar to songbirds in size, color, and marking, requiring songbirds to develop sharper eyes to detect slight imperfections. Both the genes for mimicry and discernment would spread throughout the cuckoo and songbird populations respectively. This is an example of active discrimination against other species that are trying to foil the discriminators. Racial prejudice would be the irrational generalization of kinship, when individuals identify with those physically resembling them and reject those that are different in appearance. Dawkins says parental care is more common and devoted than brother-sister in altruism, and why animals value themselves more highly than several siblings, because true relatedness may be less important in the evolution of altruism than the best estimate of relatedness or degrees of certainty. Parents are more certain about the genetic relatedness of their children compared to among siblings. This is even true for identical twins, but also shows how individual selfishness would operate more powerfully than considerations of genetic relatedness. For example, a twin would still care more for his or her children than for his or her twin sibling. Of course, children would also care less for their parents than parents care for them, given the asymmetry in resources and expected life expectancies. Therefore, altruistic behavior through kin selection is not simply about genetic relatedness.